Okay guys, this is purely for Star Wars fans out there, and I know we don't have an enormous number of them on the channel, so this is for a very, very select few who are interested in our Popcorn Junkies side of things, expressing its opinion on The Mandalorian. Let's face it, The Mandalorian is Star Wars and Lucasfilm's attempt and Disney's attempt to maintain and keep flying the flag of the nostalgia of the original three films. Star Wars, A New Hope, as it's called now, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and where they the way in which they try to sort of almost resuscitate that sense of the 70s and 80s with The Force Awakens, and then it started to drift terribly away with The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. So, The Mandalorian, Episode 2 and Episode 3. Now, before I can talk about much more, I do want to ask you guys, ask people who come to this channel who are more expert than me, what is the deal with Pedro Pascal? Why won't he take his helmet off? I recognise that it's part of Mandalorian law that he's not supposed to, but as we're going to discuss later in Episode 3, a load of Mandalorians did turn up and took their helmets off. And is it true? I think it is true. Behind the trailer, or beyond the trailer, the YouTube channel seems to be talking about the fact that there is some dispute between Pedro and Disney as to his role and his continued involvement in the project. It's a shame because Pedro Pascal is a brilliant actor. He was brilliant in Narcos. He was very good in his small part in Game of Thrones. Episode 2. Now, this was a filler episode, wasn't it? We were really excited. By the end of Episode 1, we had who we think is Boba Fett wandering off towards the camera, bald head, very exciting, very old Star Wars, really appealing to my generation. We'd had a really sort of engrossed, sort of quite prolonged, epic experience trying to get rid of the sand shark monster with the Tusken Raiders. That was kind of inventive. It was riffing a little bit on Alien with the way in which they ended up dispatching of it with a bantha covered in dynamite and all that kind of stuff. But Episode 2 was a curious one. The most curious thing about this was the fact that the mission, in a sense, was given to the Mandalorian by my most, and Kiki's most irritating character in the entire Mandalorian universe, which is the slightly curly-haired mechanic woman. And I think the fact that she once again gave a bit of a weird mission for him to look after this fish person, and at the point I saw the fish person, there's something about the fish person, like there was something about the guy with one eye at the beginning of Episode 1 that isn't quite what I expect from Star Wars creatures. You know, even in the cantina scene in the first Star Wars film, there needs to be something a little bit more granular, grainy and authentic and real, maybe cheaper even, about them. And I found the fish woman, mother, who's carrying her eggs in Episode 2, was a bit too childish for me. It was a bit too childlike and a bit childish for even young viewers of The Mandalorian that are coming to Star Wars for something a bit grittier. So anyway, so she's guarding her sort of frog spawn, it looks like, but eggs, her roe, if you like. And she's going to be taken by the Mandalorian to meet her husband or rendezvous with her husband on a certain planet. And I just found this was a really gappy episode. I found the mechanic woman being the instigator of the mission a very weak device. There was no real need to go on this mission. I mean, here's one of the things that I'm really confused about. I'm going to get to Episode 3 quite quickly. I'm confused as to why the Mandalorian, yes, he's a great warrior. He doesn't really know anything that he's doing, and he doesn't know anywhere that he's going. And he keeps falling into sort of obvious traps or accidents or mistakes and things like that. So he doesn't seem to be street smart or space smart. Do you know what I mean? Insofar as he knows what he's doing and, you know, he's been around a bit and, you know, he's to be worried and to be feared. It was an odd mission. It was an odd mission to take this woman back to her husband. Obviously in tow is the child, or Baby Yoda, as a lot of people call him. I mean, Disney themselves don't like to call him Baby Yoda. And there was a very odd sort of subplot going on in Episode 2 where Baby Yoda we kept finding Baby Yoda eating the eggs of the woman that the Mandalorian was rescuing. Now, when this happened, I looked at Kiki and said, that's a bit off, isn't it? Because whatever you think of Fish Lady, you don't want her babies to be eaten. And it wasn't dealt with, really. It was just kind of, it was meant to be quite amusing, it was meant to be quite weird, and it was both those things, but I don't know, it kind of put me a little bit off Baby Yoda for a bit, because it was like, why do you keep eating that? I mean, I know he's young, he doesn't know better and all that kind of stuff, but these are actually babies. Like the first episode, they crash, so they're kind of steered in by these X-wing fighters, or they sort of connect with these X-wing fighters, which was odd. They end up landing on a snowy planet, or crashing on a snowy planet. I thought it was going to be the planet Hoth, you know, Empire Strikes Back stuff. I thought we were going to get the great big sort of whatever, the Thomper, whatever it was called, the big thing. And we had a scene where Baby Yoda ends up touching an egg in a cavern, not dissimilar to Aliens. So the first episode was very much riffing on Jaws. This episode is very much riffing on Alien, and out of the Alien comes almost a face hugger. Spiders. Now, one thing I would say is that the CGI is top drawer. The CGI in each of the episodes is top drawer, and I have to say the execution of all of the kit, the tech, the spaceships, all that kind of stuff looks really, it's got that battered realism. It's cleverly done, because we know for a fact that these aren't real builds in the way that they were often real builds in the first movies, but they have that look of being a real build created and recreated by CGI, if you know what I mean. So when the spider thing happened, it was very, very well done. It didn't feel superimposed, it didn't feel cheap, it didn't feel like it was done for television. But one thing I did notice in episode 2, and this is something that carried over into episode 3, does anyone else think this? There seems to be a distinct lack of atmos. And what I mean by atmos is when you're recording sound on anything, short film, films, television, whatever, you generally try and record the atmospheric sound of the room or of the location that you're in at any point. You just heard some atmos of a motorbike driving by. And there are times when we're in the cockpit and what have you, and I'm guessing maybe it would be artificially silent maybe in space, but there are times where you're thinking, I want a few more beeps and a few more bleeps and a few more, the sound of like the hull moving or the engine moving and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes it sounds a bit clean, almost like they hadn't actually layered or audio mixed the entire soundtrack. Lots of other little bits and bobs in episode 2 that I did like were things like looking at the computer screens. They were blipping and blopping just like in the 70s movies. That's really nice, seeing all the same grids for the kind of targeting airplanes and all that kind of stuff. Airplanes targeting X-wing fighters and TIE fighters and all that kind of stuff. I love all of that. That's great. So that kind of really takes you back to 1977. But I was left with this feeling, is the Mandalorian a bit too nice? By the end of episode 2, I was just thinking, is he a bit too nice? And why hasn't Baby Yoda used the Force again? You know, with those spiders, why is he just sort of Baby Yoda being a bit useless? And why was the fish lady in episode 2 having essentially a sauna or a bath, or she was in a hot tub at one point? And it's just, part of me was beginning to wonder, is the Mandalorian a bit simple? Is he a bit, a simpleton? But Baby Yoda, I found in episode 2 was a bit irritating. Episode 2 did nothing. It didn't give me any character development. Me and Kiki were really disappointed by it. It seemed like an unnecessary journey, an unnecessary sort of diversion, and then being rescued at the end of episode 2, essentially, or given permission to leave without obstruction by the X-wing fighters again. It was odd. There was something very dissatisfying. If this was the second, if this is a filler episode, episode 2, why a filler episode only straight after episode 1? And I think there are only 6, 7, 8 episodes in a series. There's no real room for fillers, I don't think. So, episode 3. Episode 3, one of the things I would say about episode 3 at the forefront here is I am a Star Wars fan. I am not a Star Wars aficionado. So I haven't watched any of the animated series. I don't know any of the characters from the animated series. So I wasn't getting the references necessarily on who the new bunch of Mandalorian characters that land in this episode were. But I don't think that necessarily distracted from the success of episode 3. I really, really liked the tech in episode 3. I thought the CGI was really rich. I thought the recreation of battered realism is really good. The simplicity of the cockpit stuff. I still got the same gripe about the Atmos sound, the atmospheric sounds in the background. Not necessarily the soundtrack, the music or anything like that. But what I'm talking about there again is that sort of the natural sounds, the nat sounds as they call it, or the atmospherics of spaceships and all that kind of stuff. Fine when you're outside, but inside it's a bit empty. It doesn't sound very cluttered or very sort of sci-fi or Star Warsy. But I really like the look. I like the use of AT-ATs. What I really liked about episode 3 was the feeling of the fragments of the Empire, or the Imperial forces. Given that this is set after Return of the Jedi, you've got that real sense of the baddies still being there, but they're sort of fractured and fragmented, and they're sort of thrown about various parts of the many universes that we're in, if you like. So this starts with him sort of escaping the ice planet, landing and kind of badly landing on another planet, in another port, if you like. He falls into the sea, and we have creatures that are the same creatures as Admiral Akbar. It's a trap. It's a trap. You know, that character with the big eyes, a sort of fish head. And one of the things I was reminded of, and I made a note about, was the fact that all of the kind of emphasis on vehicles, vehicular stuff. If you think of the prequels, when you had those amazing sort of space pod sequences, that was one of the best sequences in one of those. Was it in the Phantom Menace? Can't remember which one that was in. And if you think of the land speeders and all that kind of stuff, you know, one of the things that George Lucas was really drawn to in the sort of creation of Star Wars as a concept was, obviously, he'd come off the back of making a movie called American Graffiti, all about cars, fast cars in the 50s and all that kind of stuff. And he was big into car racing and stuff. So he was in an accident when he was quite young, I think when he was a teenager, when he first learnt to drive. And so he was drawn to that whole drag racing thing, cars, fast cars and all that kind of malarkey. And you're reminded of this a lot in Star Wars, that, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on being a mechanic, fixing your kit, fixing your machinery, getting it airborne, you know, dog fights in the sky and all that kind of stuff, and sort of going through narrow gaps and all this sort of thing. So it's a nice reminder that that's what, you know, that was in the origins, if you like, of Star Wars as a franchise. And then we're in another cantina. And, you know, I'm a big cantina fan, apart from The Last Jedi's cantina. And, you know, it's that thing of, there are certain motifs that for me are really Star Wars, but you can overplay them a bit too much. I realise you're always thinking about a new generation coming through and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, it just feels like you can feel the effort that's going into making this cantina a little bit more unique or a bit different to the other cantina. I mean, we even had the mechanic in the second episode, I think, issuing the challenge to the Mandalorian to take Fishwoman off. I think it was happening almost in the same chair or the same alcove or banquette as where Harrison Ford shot Greedo. So we then have this scene where we've got Mandalorian, we've got Baby Yoda. They are offered a ship or a journey, a voyage to where other Mandalorians are. And on the trip, there was the first what I call truly arresting moment. Now, whilst episode 2 was directed by Peyton Reed, who did Ant-Man, this episode was directed by Bryce Dallas Howard, Ron Howard's daughter, who obviously she's the star of in Jurassic World. And at this point, this episode shifted over for me. It became something really, really old school Star Wars, enjoyable, entertaining, a bit camp, but also not afraid to kind of surprise or wrong foot us as viewers. And so the fishmen who offered the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda of a ship and voyage suddenly throw Yoda into this water tank on the ship, goes into the mouth of a monster. The Mandalorian's thrown in. You think they're going to die. I was getting memories of the trash compactor scene. I was getting memories of Jabba's palace when, you know, they're thrown into the whatever, the Rancor pit or whatever it was. You know, it was really exciting. And then at this point, these 3 other Mandalorian flew in, landed, took their helmets off, who are apparently characters from the animated series. That didn't really bother me. And they kind of proceeded to tell us that they come from a slightly more superior sect of Mandalorian, whereas our Mandalorian, Mando, our main man, doesn't. And that's why he can't take his helmet off. If I was the Mandalorian, I'd be well frustrated that these guys can take their helmets off, but the Mandalorian can't. And all that did was serve to make the Mandalorian seem even more inflexible and trapped and slightly limited in what his options were and what he could do. Because these 2 women and 1 guy who landed, they were pretty damn shit hot. You know, they could deal with everyone and everything, and they were knocking things all over the place. They then, the next mission in this episode is to board an Imperial craft. And I have to say, this then became the best part of this episode. And I have to say, Bryce Dallas Howard did a brilliantly commendable job of managing both the humour but also the old school Star Wars action. And for me, them taking over this ship this Imperial ship. You know, we've got stormtroopers, they're missing their targets, we're getting stormtroopers thrown off spaceships and, you know, they're falling to their deaths. You know, the stormtroopers are never hitting them. I mean, it would be quite nice if stormtroopers could hit their target, but that would require the heroes in any episode or film of Star Wars to have some pretty disposable people, some chum, some gun chum that could be, you know, thrown away, you know, cannon fodder. And there rarely is cannon fodder, is there? You can't lose a character lightly or a hero lightly in Star Wars, and that sometimes is a bit frustrating. But anyway, so we board this ship. The interiors were like old school, A New Hope. You could imagine Darth Vader may have walked down these corridors, getting a bit of Rogue One vibes, the end of Rogue One, you know. That was all really good. And so they're on the ship. Bearing in mind, Baby Yoda has been... the people that the Mandalorian has asked to babysit Baby Yoda whilst they do this job of taking over this Imperial ship is Fish Lady and her husband. But the Mandalorian fails to tell them that they may need to look out for their baby eggs because he's got a penchant for eating them, which, you know, could be an oversight on the Mandalorian's part. So I was taken back to the thrills, 70s thrills of Star Wars in this scene on the ship. You had a captain at the front of the ship. You had two of the Imperial pilots, you know, in their sort of grey suits with the kind of peaked kind of hat, you know, really stern looking but comedic, funny, witty, evil, stern. And they were trying to steer the ship out to safety whilst the Mandalorian and all his new Mandalorian mates were kind of trying to hijack the ship. There was a brilliant moment where some of the Imperial troops at the back, stormtroopers and another Imperial captain, are trapped, and then they press a button and to release them, and they get sucked out of the ship and into space. And it was the timing on it. There was good comic timing. There was action timing. It was really brilliantly executed. And basically, the ship is being overwhelmed by the Mandalorian and the goodies, and they recognise that they're going down. And then the captain, brilliantly and ruthlessly, a little bit like Peter Cushing in the original film and Darth Vader in those scenes around the big round table, just shoots the pilots. Whoa, dark. That's when Star Wars is at its best. Shoots them and decides to, in kamikaze pilot style, take the ship and try and drive it down into the planet beneath them to kill everyone on board. And for me, all of that stuff, all of the handling of the material and the moments on that ship were top drawer, brilliant, entertaining, wrong footing. You know, there was a wry smile at the back of it. It was old school Star Wars, and Bryce Dallas Howard absolutely nailed it, I thought, there. And there was a point to it all. You felt that there was a mission of sorts that mattered. You know, I hope this series moves beyond... I mean, one of my major criticisms of this episode is that it clocks in at 30 minutes. What's going on there? 30 minutes. You know, this is the second season of one of the most successful kind of offshoots of Star Wars. And you've got a filler episode for episode 2 and a 30-minute episode for episode 3, and still no suggestion of the very big tease, if you like, at the end of episode 1, which is Boba Fett. So, you know, I think, you know, they kind of managed to rescue the ship. I mean, it's a bit of an analogy to use is the way in which they rescue the ship in this episode from crashing. They've kind of rescued these 3 episodes and they're pulling them back up, heading for air, if you like, and meaning and purpose. But I hope that they don't crash it again in episode 4. So I'm definitely hooked in. Kiki's hooked in. This really snagged us back in. You know, Yoda needs to stop eating the baby eggs and fish eggs. The Mandalorian needs to grow some, you know, hefty ones and start to know what it is that he's doing. I think the Mandalorian needs to check his contract as a Mandalorian and see, why did this lot manage to take their helmets off but I can't? I think Disney Plus and Disney need to make sure, and Lucasfilms need to make sure Pedro Pascal can't take his helmet off, because I think he might be happier if he could. I like the addition of the 2 women. I can't even pronounce their names, but these 2 characters from the animated series, I like them. I thought they were convincing. I'm sure there are lots of Star Wars aficionados for whom they weren't the best representation of these cartoon characters, but I quite like them. I thought they were believable. And as I say, I thought the representation of the Imperial, sort of stranded Imperial troops, and we had the hologram of, you know, the guy from Breaking Bad, who's a brilliant actor, who's playing the sort of, you know, he's kind of the head honcho of this sort of particular group, isn't he? And I thought he was good, and I thought there was a sort of sense of menace and a sense of purpose outside of the Mandalorian, and that overarching sense of what's going on outside the Mandalorian could make this more than just the Mandalorian does another episodic mission. And I think it needs to move beyond episodic mission, and we need to start getting a much bigger narrative arc way beyond these individual skirmishes, if you like, from episode to episode. So I really much preferred episode 3. It could have been longer. Really didn't like episode 2. Fingers crossed for episode 4. What do you think, guys?
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.